Good day everyone and welcome to Winter Monday. For some reason it's back to being cold as hell today, and talking about being cold, we are going back to revisit something we left out in the cold for a few months now, which is the predictions of 9.2. So we have left a few months ago with the thoughts, what we thought was going to become the new meta of 9.2 when it came to both Mythic Plus and raiding. Now it's been long enough. We have gotten through enough of the changes of this patch. We have gotten through the double legendaries, we have gotten to the tier sets, we've gotten to 20-ish item level increase for most players right now that are doing this type of content, plus of course the balance tuning. So at this point it's unlikely that we're gonna get any more major changes in this patch. Even if we count 9.2.5 as being part of the same season, there doesn't seem for now to be many changes happening. So let's go and take a look at and revisit just how correct I was with my guesses a few months ago. Starting with the healers, so let's bring the prediction right in the middle. This was the reality prediction of healers as 9.2 was coming out. Now let's compare this to the current situation of healers, both the Mythic Plus version as well as the raid version of healers. We can see when it comes to Mythic Plus that Shaman is at the top, followed by Holy Priest. Holy Priest is more used at the extremely highest of keys, while Resto Shaman is the more widely used in the high keys in general. You have Holy Paladin and Resto Druid more or less in the same level, although not for the same reasons. Holy Paladin was more like at the top and started falling, and Resto Druid was at the bottom and started rising. So right now they are at the moment where they are essentially waving at each other as they go by. That's their current situation. And at the bottom you have Mistweaver and Discipline, which haven't really moved from last tier. They are still not very powerful and popular Mythic Plus specs due to their lack of damage mostly. Hilarious being two of the specs that want to heal by doing damage, that they happen to be one of the specs with the lowest damage. And then you have the raid version of today. We have Holy Priest at the top, followed by Resto Druid. Resto Druid's pure HPS has proven to be very powerful, especially after the bosses have gotten nerfed in more damage. Pure HPS of Resto is very useful. Then we have the clump in the middle, the clump of Resto Shaman, Holy Paladin and Discipline Priest, which is all powerful enough, quite useful in multiple situations. I didn't want to put Discipline Priest below these two specs, even though it probably should be, because Discipline Priest is still not very used, purely because of the power of Holy right now, but still, it's definitely not as weak as Mistweaver. And at the same time, I didn't want to dump Mistweaver down to the absolute bottomest of the D tier to make space for Discipline in C, so I end up shaping it like this, which I still think is quite representative of the situation. So these two sides, the Mythic Plus side and the raid side, give us a combined situation as of this moment. Holy Priest, we can say, is definitely the one at the top, because it's just at the top in both activities, followed by Resto Shaman, who is still at the top in Mythic Plus, but not quite definitely in the raid, followed by, once again, the middle pack of Resto Druid and Holy Paladin, and at the bottom still Mistweaver and Discipline Priest. So if we had to go and judge the prophecy of 9.2, I would say Holy Priest and Resto Shaman were quite spot on, same for Discipline Priest at the bottom. I don't like this one. Yeah, much better. Same for Disc at the bottom. Holy Paladin being middle of the pack for both Mythic Plus and Raid Encounters, I think it's decent enough of a guess. Where we go a little bit weird is here, is the gutted spot, where, if you remember, this was when, of course, the news of Resto Druid and Mistweaver Monk's nerfs came live, their Covenant abilities nerfs, so there wasn't much hope for both of them. So I didn't believe in Mistweaver, which ended up being mostly correct. However, the lack of belief of Resto Druid has definitely proven to be wrong at the moment. That definitely shouldn't be here. So I think the main mistake of the prophecy for 9.2 has been Resto Druid at the moment. They're definitely progressing to be doing better than where they were expected to be in the predictions. Following healers, we have tanks. So let's bring up our prophecy of tanks, and let's also bring up the tank situation in Mythic Plus and the tank situation in the raid at the moment. So the Mythic Plus situation obviously sees Blood Death Knight at the absolute top, followed by Brewmaster, and then Prot Paladin. And then at the bottom, unsurprisingly, you have Prot Warrior, and in between Prot Warriors and Paladins, you have Guardian and Vengeance. In raid encounters, there is a little bit more of a drastic gap in raid encounters because Blood and Brewmaster are the top. There is a middle gap of Prot Paladin, and then at the bottom you have the other 3 specs. We pointed this out multiple times. When it comes to raiding, tanks need to fill some niche gaps in your composition. In this case, Blood Death Knight is super self-sufficient. It's very good at taking both magical and physical damage because they just heal themselves back up. They can also bring AMZ, but also in quite some situations they also have grips, which are very, very useful for ad management. And then you have Brewmaster, which is a very tanky, solid, consistent tank in raid encounters, plus they have super mobility, so they can fill the weakness of the super lack of mobility of a Death Knight with their hyper mobility of a Brewmaster. Prot Paladin is somewhat in the middle because it can still be used, it still has some utility that can be used in the raid, but nowhere near the level of the top. And then at the bottom you have the other 3 tank specs, which don't really have much of any reason to be brought. I guess if you really don't have any Havoc Demon Hunters, the Vengeance for the debuff, and perhaps Rallying Cry of your Prot Warrior if you have no DPS warriors, but it's really just not as much to justify bringing a Prot Warrior. So once we take away the raid and the Mythic Plus and we create the merged version of the current situation, we get this thing right here. So as compared to the prediction. So first of all, time to point out the clear wrong prediction of Blood Death Knight. They're definitely much higher up than what was predicted. We can also say that Brewmaster probably should stay here. You know, I created a shrunk down version of the rating for tanks compared to this one, so I'm willing to accept Brewmaster being here, but I'm not willing to accept Prot Paladin and to accept Guardian Druid either. Because Prot Paladin was expected to be there because of the super high damage of Mythic Plus, but it turned out to be much less prominent in raid encounters. I thought they could have still been used. They have definitely disappointed me in their popularity in the raid. As I said, Brewmaster can stay here, very close to Blood. Also Vengeance can stay here, but yeah, there was a clear gap in the thoughts I had when it came to Guardian, especially. They did start positively. We can say this. They did start to be quite prominent in Mythic Plus at the start of this tier, but then as time went on, Blood DK started rising, Guardian Druid started losing a little bit more over time, so it didn't end up panning out. They are still doing fine, by the way. They're not like dead tanks like this one right here, 100% guaranteed correct guess, and they're not as dead as Protection Warrior, but still definitely not as well as I was expecting them to do. After the tanks, we have to start jumping into the DPS. So let's bring here the first of our DPS prophecy, which was the melee DPS. Talking about melee DPS, let's bring up their Mythic Plus and their raid situation at the moment. Mythic Plus is quite self-explanatory, I would say. You have Survival being the absolute dominant powerhouse, followed by Subtlety, followed by Windwalker. These 3 specs make up for something like 90% of all melee specs above 25 keys or something, so it's very, very clear which of the melee DPS specs are doing best at the moment in Mythic Plus. You also have a massive bottom this time around. You have a massive bottom tier of specs in Mythic Plus compared to what we have seen usually. This bottom is quite larger. In the middle, you have Enhancement, Fury, and Havoc. These are the 3 other specs that are quite popular if you start going a little bit lower in keys. So from keys in the 15 to 20-ish range, these 3 specs are also quite popular, so they deserve to be higher up. Frost DK was sort of in the middle. I didn't know where to put it exactly, definitely not as much as at the bottom compared to the other specs, so that's where they end up. Then you have the raid. The raid is quite a clusterfuck because it's very, very difficult to gauge what melee DPS can do in the raid. So the way I planned out the rating, the ranking of right now is to try to guess what they do best. So at the bottom, I put the 4 specs that don't really excel at anything in the raid. They are not one of the top single target specs. They're not one of the top AoE spec. They're not one of the top cleave specs either. They're just not not. They're not, okay? They are not. In the C tier and partially even better in the B tier, I have put specs that specialize very well into one or maybe two things, like Feral and Assassination have very, very good single target damage. Meanwhile, Survival and Windwalker have very, very good AoE damage. Unholy has very good burst windows and consistent damage all throughout, similar to Subtlety as well. So these specs definitely specialize in things that are worth bringing them for. And then at the top. The top is so much not a top that I decided not even to fill the S tier, because Havoc, Frost and Enhancement overall, if you look at the popularity plus the performance of all the different bosses, they seem to be the ones doing the better, but still, they just don't strike me as an S tier spec. It's not like when you look at Mythic Plus and Survival. It's not an instant clear S tier spec right now for any of these melee specs in the raid. So that's where I decided to settle for the rating of the melee DPS. Once we take away the raid and we take away the Mythic Plus version and we merge them, this is what we get. Pretty much Survival has to stay in the S tier because of how well it's doing in Mythic Plus, and also how well it can do in certain fights in the raid where tons of AoE is very well needed, undoing Lords of Dread, for example. Subtlety follows suit because they are also quite good in Mythic Plus and quite good in the raid overall, so they can stay up there. When we go and take a look at the bottom, Outlaw, Arms and Ret, yeah, that's where they should be still. And then you have the middle pack overall, specs doing only good in a particular thing, like Feral and Assassination ends up being not enough to justify bringing them any higher. Windwalker, on the other hand, being very good in Mythic Plus, same for Fury Warrior. So this is the overall situation we have right now. What about the prophecy of 9.2? So let's start with the fuck-ups of 9.2. Okay, so Havoc, you know, you could say Havoc is S tier, but I don't know. I don't feel like this is correct whatsoever. I think Fury also shouldn't be one of the better ones. Neither should Windwalker. Pretty sure. Yeah, obviously this is wrong. This is also kind of wrong, but it depends where you see it. But they definitely have been doing better than expected. And then you have the whole bottom of this whole clump. At the bottom, the only one I'm willing to give a way out is Unholy. Even though I put, for example, Ret here instead of here and Outlaw here instead of here, they're still fine because they're still at the bottom, more or less the least performing one, except for Unholy. I think Unholy has quite a decent niche at the moment, so they are at the bottom because their niche is not good enough, but at the very least it can still be used, they can still benefit from it, so I don't think this was good enough. I think Subtlety is good, Outlaw, Ret, Feral, Assassination and Arms being towards the bottom is all fine. We have to say the bottom was okay, but the top has been fumbled a lot. Although, in my defense, these top ones have only been, you know, missed by one spot, right? We have Havoc, you know, one spot here, Windwalker one spot, and Enhancement one spot, Frost one spot. So it's not too bad of a fail. I would be okay with this type of failure for melee DPS. What we have for last now is the range DPS. This was the prophecy of 9.2. Oh god, this one is going to be a bad one, I can feel it. So this is the situation in Mythic Plus and in the raid at the moment for range DPS. Obviously, in both cases, Destruction and Demonology are doing more than fine. In Mythic Plus, you have the follow-ups of Marksmanship and Frost, and then Fire and Elemental. And then you have a whole big bunch of bottom specs that don't do too well right now. In Raid Encounters, the main differences are you still have the same 3 bottom specs, but Fire and Balance are significantly better in the raid. They leapfrog the Frost and Elemental Marksmanship bridge. This is because in the raid, it's not just the amount of damage you can do, but it is also how and when you can do this damage. And I'm gonna tell you why. Because if you went and looked at the chart of DPS, why would you put Balance Druid and why would you put Fire Mage at the top, towards the top, if Balance Druid is here and Fire Mage is here? You know, why are you putting them as if they were here? The reason for that is that several fights require their burst damage windows, right? For example, a very important one is the Monstrous Soul of Anduin. Yes, it keeps getting nerfed, but the general idea during the Monstrous Soul of Anduin is that you have to kill it before the raid dies, and you have something like 20 seconds at the very best. And look where balance is, which is here, and then more importantly, look where fire is. This type of damage that they do is much more important than the consistent damage of an elemental shaman in the fight of Anduin, because of the Monstrous Soul, for example. So even if you look at the overall damage, you won't get the full picture of how important sometimes the burst of certain specs can be. That's why balance and fire mage can still do quite well in the raid, even though their overall performance doesn't show it. So once we take away the raid and the Mythic Plus, and we get our complete Exodia formed version of the rage DPS, this is the result of 9.2. Obviously, the two Warlock specs stay at the top, Marksmanship and Frost, because of how overall powerful they are in Mythic Plus and still used in the raid. You have this big gap of averageness in the middle, and then the bottom of disappointments. So once we look at the predictions, we have BM, after my original 9.1.5 hope that they were going to be here. No, definitely they haven't. Same goes for Arcane. I would still put Affliction here as being one of the worst 3 specs. And also Demonology, Frost and Marksmanship are doing fine. Elemental, Fire Mage, great. However, Balance definitely is not going to be in the S tier as a range spec, and Destruction is definitely not going to be a C spec for DPS specs either. I would also like to put an X on Shadow Priest. I had more hopes for them, but definitely not at the same level of these other specs. So this would be the overall situation for range DPS. It was a little bit easier to guess them because the situation of quite a few specs was already, it was more predictable to begin with because of the power of some of their tier sets or the situation they already were in. For example, Arcane. Arcane was already at the bottom, their tier sets or double legendary combination was nothing to write home about, so you had no reason to expect them to do any better. So it was easier to guess the range DPS than it was the melee DPS, or more importantly even the tanks. So this is what we have at the end of this prediction. I think it went quite nice for healers and for range DPS. I think where I fumbled the most was in the melee DPS camp and the tank camp. So basically the melee. The melee camp I got a little bit more wrong than I thought. The most surprising out of all of these, to me, the most surprising is definitely not survival, because we saw the tier set bonuses before it came out, so it was possible already. It was predictable that survival would have done as well. I didn't believe they were S tier, still I knew they were going to do better. What surprised me the most is the fall of Prot Paladin. I was thinking they could have kept their level for a little bit longer, but particularly the change of the tier set of Blood, giving them much more damage, sort of skewed things around. Now Prot Paladin isn't even the niche tank with top damage anymore, because Blood is apparently taking that spot as well. So that's one of the things that surprised me, as well as Resto Druid. I didn't think Resto Druid was going to rise as much given the popularity of Holy, which is already an HPS style healer, but apparently it still is, and it's one of the few specs that is continuing to rise 3 months into the patch. There aren't many situations like these. Resto Druid is one of the few ones that is continuing to be more and more seen in the raid as of this moment. So overall, I would give my predictions a 7 out of 10. A mix of the 8 to 9 out of 10 of the range camp and the 4, 5 out of 10 of the melee camp, which was quite wrong overall. So I'm gonna put myself in the middle. So with this team in mind, let me guys know what you think about your most surprising discoveries in 9.2, which specs you weren't really thinking about becoming this good, or which specs surprised you because of how bad they became in 9.2. You didn't see it coming at all for some specs, perhaps. So this one was the end of our prophecy recap video of 9.2 to see how things have changed compared to what I guessed was going to happen. Thank you guys again for watching the video and for helping to contribute, of course, to the growth of the channel, which also includes liking and commenting on this video, as well as subscribing on my channel. No limitations for today. I have nothing to say at the moment about who to stop from clicking the subscribe button. Also, as usual, I am found on Twitter over here, and you can support me on Patreon over here. Doing so will give you access to my Discord channel, where plenty of secret meetings and gatherings happen. This being said, thank you guys again. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I like it though. It started raining all of a sudden, and now it's cold. I get to bring back my cozy clothing again, so I enjoy cold more than warmth, to be honest.